This tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean hides a secret no one can uncover. Sure, it looks like paradise with emerald forests, turquoise reefs, and not a single resort brochure or drone-shot wedding proposal in sight. But don't let the postcard view fool you. North Sentinel Island is home to a tribe that has been living in complete isolation for around 50,000 years. They don't want your Wi-Fi, your coconuts, your selfies, or your company, and honestly, with the way humanity's been going, that might be the healthiest boundary setting in history. In fact, if you try to visit, they'll probably greet you with a bow and arrow, literally. So who exactly are the Sentinelese, and why have they remained so hostile to the outside world? Well, in this video, we'll get as close as possible to understanding their way of life without crossing their boundaries. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that now. Hit the like button to show your support, and let's explore one of the most mysterious tribes on Earth. I had to fly all the way from the US, crossing 3 different continents, just to reach the Bay of Bengal. We're talking more than 25 hours of travel, usually with a stop in places like Doha or Dubai, then another connection through a big Indian city before finally landing at Veer Savarkar International Airport in Port Blair. Port Blair is the closest bit of civilization you can get to. It's the capital of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and it's basically the last stop before things get interesting. Now, North Sentinel Island itself is tiny, only about 60 square kilometers, but don't let the size fool you. It might just be the most exclusive piece of land on the planet. Not because you need a ticket to visit, but because you're not welcome at all. The island isn't just remote, it's naturally protected. First, you've got sharp, unforgiving coral reef circling the waters like a built-in defense system. And suppose you somehow manage to navigate through that. In that case, you run straight into the man-made barrier, a 3 nautical mile exclusion zone enforced by the Indian Navy. Cross that line and it's basically an international do not disturb sign backed by military force. And personally, I'm not trying to spark World War III over curiosity. What's even more interesting is that the Indian government classifies the Sentinelese as a particularly vulnerable tribal group. This basically means if you go there, they could kill you, and even if they don't, your germs could kill them. So yeah, best to observe from a distance. As far as we know, no outsider has ever set foot on this island and lived to tell the story, at least no one I've heard of. But thanks to satellite imagery and distant observations, we can still piece together glimpses of who these mysterious people are. And let's be honest, no amount of coconuts, curiosity, or cash is worth catching an arrow to the chest. Plus, I have a beautiful wife waiting for me back home. Babe, if you're watching this, I love you. So guys, to understand why the Sentinelese have built such an unshakable wall between them and the rest of the world, let's briefly look at the history of contact and how badly it went. This takes us back to 1771. A British East India Company ship passed by the island at night and spotted dozens of flickering lights along the shore. They made the smartest decision of their lives to keep sailing, because if they had stopped, that welcome party would have been anything but friendly. Fast forward almost a century to 1867. An Indian merchant ship called the Nineveh crashed into a coral reef and got stranded. The sailors barely had time to gather themselves before warriors emerged from the tree line, bows drawn, bodies smeared in bright red pigment like they were painted for war. For a moment, you might think they were performing some kind of ritual display, but no, they were launching a full-on attack. The survivors managed to hold them off just long enough to escape. But it made one thing very clear. This island was not open for guests. However, the worst intrusion came in 1880 when a British colonial officer named Maurice Biddle Portman arrived on the island. When the Sentinelese vanished into the forest to avoid him, he did the unthinkable by capturing 6 of them, an elderly couple and 4 children, and took them to Port Blair. This so-called contact mission turned into a disaster that changed everything. The 2 elders quickly fell ill and died from exposure to foreign diseases their bodies had never encountered. Realizing the danger, Portman sent the sick children back, but it was already too late. Those germs went with them. Without knowing it, he had introduced a biological weapon, modern illness, to a people with zero immunity. And from that moment on, the Sentinelese response to outsiders became even more volatile. Every attempt after that went just as badly. The Sentinelese weren't interested in handshakes or negotiations. By the 1930s, they were officially recorded as a tribe that slays every stranger on sight. It didn't matter who you were, British, American, Indian, or even other tribes from the Andaman Islands, if you stepped on their island, you were the enemy. But as history shows, some people just don't learn, and tragedy kept repeating itself. So I went around asking locals how this ancient standoff continued into the modern age, an age of helicopters, search missions, and social media. I spoke to a local fruit seller who's lived here her entire life. She told me that when she was just a little girl in 1967, an anthropologist named Tien Pandit led a series of gift drop missions on behalf of the Indian government. Their plan was simple: flow offerings like coconuts, bananas, and small pieces of iron onto the beach, hoping to trade fear for curiosity and maybe earn a little goodwill from the Sentinelese. I was told the outcomes were always unpredictable. Some days the Sentinelese would grab the gifts and for a moment it looked like progress, only for them to suddenly storm the shoreline and unleash a rain of arrows. They even used a very unmistakable form of communication by lining up and pretending to defecate in the direction of the intruders. Honestly, if there's ever been a universal sign for go away, that's definitely it. After thanking the woman and buying some fruit from her stall, I headed off to speak with more locals. At a small food spot, another resident told me about something surprising that happened on January 4th, 1991. For the first time in recorded history, a team, this time including anthropologist Madhumala Chattopadhyay, managed to have a peaceful contact with the Sentinelese. This makes Madhumala the first female outsider to come in contact with them. The Sentinelese men actually walked into the shallow water, accepted coconuts directly from the team, and for a few fleeting moments, they even smiled. Pictures from that day still exist, and it's one of the rare times the world saw them without hostility. However, even that brief moment of peace was considered too dangerous, and by 1997, all expeditions were officially stopped. The new policy became one of pure isolation. The Sentinelese stance toward the outside world was made even more obvious after the 2004 tsunami. When a relief helicopter flew over to check on them, a lone Sentinelese man walked onto the beach, calmly drew his bow, and fired an arrow straight at the aircraft. One minute there's smiles over coconuts, and the next someone's trying to shoot you out of the sky. I guess that's the Sentinelese way of saying, we're fine, go away. And of course, we all remember the 2018 incident when American missionary John Allen Chau attempted to visit the island illegally. The moment he set foot on the beach, he was killed, and his body was never recovered to this day. He had gone there to preach Christianity, but the Sentinelese weren't interested in any outside religion, language, or way of life. In a controversial decision, the Indian government chose not to retrieve Chau's body, honoring the tribe's isolation and the right to be left alone. Every encounter, whether it starts with gifts or curiosity, ends the same way: arrows in the air and silence settling back over the jungle. So if we can't set foot on the island, what does life inside actually look like? Let's board a boat and take a closer look from a distance that even the Sentinelese might tolerate. From distant sightings and a few abandoned camps, experts estimate that the Sentinelese population sits somewhere between 50 and 150 people, spread across a few small family groups. Physically, they tend to be short in stature with dark skin and strong athletic builds. Both men and women live almost completely nude, wearing only simple fiber belts, vine ornaments, or small accessories. Not for fashion, but function. Their homes are very minimal. They build temporary camp-style settlements with lean-to shelters and larger communal huts. What's interesting is that they don't stay in one place for long. Once a camp has served its purpose, they simply abandon it and move on, leaving almost no trace behind. Basically, they don't have a single place they call home. The entire island is their home. They move freely, settle briefly, and leave without a trace, living in complete harmony with the land. They are also true hunter-gatherers, with no signs of farming or agriculture. Their diet revolves around wild pigs, but most of their food comes from the ocean: fish, crabs, and shellfish pulled straight from the reef. You could call them Stone Age people, but that would be an understatement. They're highly resourceful. They don't smelt metal, yet they're experts at cold forging iron from washed-up shipwrecks, crafting it into deadly arrowheads and tools with impressive skill. Talk about next-level recycling. They even built slender outrigger canoes just wide enough for 1 or 2 people. But here's the catch. They never venture into deep water. They only paddle within the shallow lagoon and reef, using long poles to navigate the tides like silent shadows on the water. I asked my boat driver if anyone knew anything about their culture, and he mentioned a few observations. Distinctive dances, bold nonverbal gestures meant to warn outsiders, and even rumors that they place their dead in trees rather than bury them. Honestly, that one caught me off guard. I mean, most cultures bury or cremate their dead, not hang them in trees like collectibles. But to the Sentinelese, this island is a complete and self-sustaining world. They don't need our methods, our beliefs, or our technology. But there's something that still bugs me. Why do they react to outsiders with such brutal consistency? They don't know me, my intentions, or even my name. Yet if I stepped on that beach, they'd probably be ready to take my head and display it next to Uncle So-and-so in the branches. So what created this deep, automatic hostility? Let's break it down. From what the locals told me, their aggression isn't random or savage. It's a calculated survival strategy. It comes from collective memory and inherited trauma passed down through generations. The memory of what happened in 1880 when the British kidnapped their elders and children only for disease to wipe them out is likely burned into their oral history. Even without a written language, trauma like that becomes legend, retold through generations as a warning that foreigners bring death. And if that wasn't enough, they only have to look at what happened to their neighboring tribes to understand exactly what contact with the outside world leads to. On an island near North Sentinel, the Great Andamanese tribes, who allowed contact, were nearly wiped out by diseases like measles, syphilis, and other diseases. Entire subgroups vanished from the map. The Sentinelese saw this unfold, and to them, the message couldn't be clearer. The outside world doesn't bring help, it brings death. And honestly, I think they don't need us. I mean, they thrived in isolation for thousands of years. Their hostility isn't hatred, it's self-preservation. And it's worked. Where other tribes disappeared, they survived. That's why India now enforces a strict policy of protective isolation. In their eyes, we are the invasive species, and it's hard to argue with that. Their story matters because it forces us to confront a harsh truth. When isolation ends, extinction begins. And that brings us to another tribe, one that did allow contact. The Jurawa live on the South and Middle Andaman Islands and are often compared to the Sentinelese because they too were once aggressively hostile to outsiders. Well into the late 20th century, they lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers, hunting wild pigs, fishing, and gathering honey. They defended their land by attacking intruders and raiding settlements. But everything changed in 1998. Almost without warning, the Jurawa stepped out of the forest and initiated peaceful contact. Just like that, hostility ended. And that's when the real problems began. Instead of defending their land with arrows, they now stopped vehicles on the Andaman Trunk Road asking for food or tobacco. With contact came measles outbreaks, dependency on handouts, and exploitation, including illegal tourism where outsiders treated them like a human safari attraction. Their story is the exact warning the Sentinelese are trying to avoid. To make it worse, illegal tour operators began running human safaris, driving tourists through Jarawa territory just to gawk at near-naked tribespeople. Imagine paying money to watch another society fall apart. I don't think that's tourism, but exploitation. Well, the Indian government eventually banned these tours, but by then the damage was done. Loss of independence, rising dependency, and a culture at risk of collapse. Today, the Jarawa, around 400 people left, stand as a living warning. They opened the door to outsiders, and everything started to unravel. The Sentinelese, on contrast, are still intact because they never let that door open.
In fact, some people see the Sentinelese as just another isolated tribe. But in reality, they are a living proof of what life was like during the Stone Age. A community untouched by globalization, technology, or even agriculture. This makes them the last truly uncontacted tribe on Earth. And we often treat curiosity as something noble. But here in Sentinelese Island, curiosity can kill. The Sentinelese have made one thing clear. Sometimes the highest form of respect is leaving them alone. Maybe the most respectful thing we can do is stop trying to understand them up close. And if this journey intrigued you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more. Until next time, see you on the next travel adventure.